People talk a lot about stress, but what does it actually mean? Stress is something that's very much personal to us, and we experience it in different ways. Stress is essentially when a situation, pressure, or change exceeds our coping abilities. Take a roller coaster ride, for example. You might have two people that go on a roller coaster together. One person may take a genuine enjoyment out of that experience. Other people might take a genuine sense of fear and anxiety. The roller coaster itself doesn't change, but our perceptions of it will differ. The same can be said for other stressful situations. Ultimately, it depends on your perception of that situation that determines whether or not you see it as a stressor. Of course, the roller coaster example is an example of short-term stress, which in isolation may not cause any harm whatsoever. It's only when stress accumulates beyond your coping abilities and without adequate recovery, the stress can become a problem. Stress is likely to occur after an accumulation of life change events. Those events can be both positive and negative. They might include a business realignment, a promotion at work, or even something enjoyable such as a holiday or a Christmas break. What matters is there's a change to your normal routine. When a number of changes to your life happen within a short space of time, that's when it can have an impact on your resilience and your stress. We all know that stress can make us feel under pressure, agitated, and sometimes overwhelmed. The question is, how does stress affect our body and our mind, and what can we do about it? Within the body, you have the central nervous system, which is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. Within the central nervous system, you have the autonomic nervous system, which is regulating things that are outside of your control. Things like blinking, breathing, and your heartbeat. Within the autonomic nervous system, you have two particular branches. One is the sympathetic nervous system. That's known as the fight or flight system. The other is the parasympathetic nervous system. That is the rest and digest system. And although they interact with each other, they both have different roles. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for increasing heart rate, increasing blood pressure, and increasing blood sugar to help you to perform when stress hits. The rest and digest system is responsible for suppressing heart rate and bringing you back down to what's known as homeostasis. DHEA is an immune system boosting hormone, which means it helps to stave off the development of lifestyle-related diseases. The problem here is that DHEA and cortisol are released from the same area of the body, the adrenal gland. This means that when someone is exposed to chronic stress, without the ability to recover and adapt to that stress, the DHEA is not being released. This means that the risk of disease is increased. Excess cortisol and chronic stress can increase the risk of strokes and heart attacks happening. The reason being is that when cortisol is released, it creates an inflammatory response within the arterial lining. That inflammation could then lead to an increased cholesterol. If that cholesterol becomes unstable and breaks off and travels down to the smaller arteries of the heart or of the brain, that could result in the stroke or the heart attack. Stress can also have an effect on the way that your brain functions. Normally, when you experience a situation or a stimulus, it goes via the thalamus and then into the cerebral cortex, the outer part of the brain that's responsible for high-level thinking, such as strategy, executive decision-making, and creativity. The problem is when we're under stress, that whole system is bypassed and it goes via the amygdala. The amygdala is very closely linked to your fight or flight response. Therefore, when you're under stress, the amygdala will result in your fight or flight response engaging more rapidly, and therefore you don't have the outer human thinking that you would normally have. As a result, you might act in a way that you would later regret. Now that we know a bit more about stress, the question is, what can we do to improve our resilience, to improve our ability to deal with pressure? When it comes to effective stress management, it's important to focus on the factors that are within your perceived control. One factor that's particularly useful to improve is sleep quality. Sleep deprivation can lead to increased activation of the amygdala, which is of course responsible for increasing the fight or flight reaction. By improving your sleep quality, you help to reduce the activation of the amygdala, which of course is linked to the fight or flight response. Furthermore, an improved sleep architecture can help to improve the regulation of cortisol. Low to moderate exercise can be very useful for stress management. Exercises that place a focus on muscle tension and deep breathing, such as yoga for example, are very good because they drive up the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, unlike high-intensity exercise, which drives up the activation of the fight or flight system. Therefore, going for a light to brisk walk before bedtime could be a more effective stress relief than going for a high-intensity run. Furthermore, performing regular exercise can be a good distraction from the stresses in your life. There are other lifestyle factors to consider too. Nicotine, caffeine and alcohol are often used as de-stress techniques. However, they actually drive up the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, and in doing so, exacerbate stress more than they help it. Therefore, the casual cup of tea or the occasional glass of wine to help de-stress after a long day might not be as effective as we once thought. Taking these factors on board and modifying your behaviour will help you to improve your ability to prepare for, react to and recover from stresses in your life, ultimately improving your resilience.